Hello and welcome, this is Redditosker, and today I want to talk about a little Elden Ring controversy that has cropped up. You see, Elden Ring has been nominated for Game of the Year. In fact, it's not just Game of the Year, Elden Ring has been nominated for several awards in different categories. And one of those categories happens to be Best Narrative. And that's why this minor controversy has arisen. There's a lot of people that feel that Elden Ring doesn't deserve to win Best Narrative. That in fact, it doesn't even deserve to be nominated. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. The following is from video game journalists, which I only mention because it shows that this isn't a random viewpoint, it's a common opinion among certain circles with institutional authority.
The Game Awards nominations are so bizarre this year. Saifu for Fighting Game, Neon White for Debut Indie, Elden Ring for Narrative. Was everybody asleep?
Elden Ring for Best Narrative is truly a farce LMAO.
And finally they go on to this one.
Lore is great. Do more lore. Just don't subsist on a diet of lore when it comes to narrative. Narrative is everything that's used to tell stories, and I find a narrative that just uses mountains of lore boring, sorry. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay. Now, my peers in Elden Ring nerdship have already responded to these complaints. Lore Hunter, Ziostorm, and Zuli the Witch have all made their own videos trying to explain how Elden Ring delivers its narrative. And the things that they say are basically what you would expect. There is a story, it's told through environmental storytelling and item descriptions. The games are purposely ambiguous, you're supposed to go out and share your ideas with other players and try and come up with a community conclusion. And all of those things are true, they're very true, but in the spirit of being fair to the people that don't like Elden Ring's story, I'm going to assume that they already know all that, and that what they're really talking about when they're criticizing Elden Ring's story is the plot. And if that's the case, then I think I see where they're coming from. And so for a moment, let me try and explain what I think is the general objection to the plots of Elden Ring and Souls games. If you ask 5 lore nerds what the plot of Elden Ring is, it's possible that you'll get 5 different answers. If you ask them what the point of the game is, you might get 5 more. And at least one of them might say that it doesn't matter what the actual point is or what the actual plot is, that the real point is interpreting the story and that's the only point, which reflects badly on the fans if that's the attitude they're going to take. Because saying that the game is nothing but interpretation is just another way of saying that there's no real meaning. It lends credence to the idea, this very long-standing criticism that Souls games have had, that the story is nothing but glorified fanfiction. That's the general objection number 1. I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to spend this video talking about it very much. I've already made a video on that topic before, and those objections are also addressed by the recent videos of Lore Hunter, Zuli the Witch, and Ziostorm. Specifically, Lore Hunters I liked the most, if you wanted my opinion. The second objection, which I find more interesting, and which is explicitly said in the tweets that I showed you, is that Elden Ring delivers the bulk of its narrative through the lore, and that delivering the bulk of that narrative through lore is not an example of good storytelling, that it's boring, and it doesn't deserve the nomination it received. This argument is interesting because they cede ground here. They admit that Elden Ring does have a narrative, and she even says that narrative is everything that's used to tell the story, which I actually think is absolutely correct, and something that not everyone understands. But where I think she's wrong, where I think they're wrong, is that lore isn't the only way Souls games tell their story, and it might not even be the most important or primary way in which the story gets told. One of the reasons I love Souls games is because in Souls games the gameplay is the story. Souls games do a good job of connecting its very different aspects, like lore, exploration, and combat, in such a way that each is improved by the presence of the other. One of the clearest ways they do this is in how story elements are revealed or emphasized through boss battles. Let me give you an example. In Bloodborne's main game, you hear about Ludwig, first hunter of the Healing Church, fairly early on. There's not much information given to you, but what little you do have suggests he was a holy warrior, descended from a line that valued honor and chivalry. In the DLC, you finally get to meet him, and he has transformed into the most hideous of beasts. His body is asymmetrical chaos, His lower body consists of several thin legs, ending in hooves or talons, with at least one of them flailing uselessly in the air. His upper body has 2 elongated arms, one of which he uses to support his misshapen body. Between his arms, above his horse head, protrudes a gaping circular mouth, which enfolds a cluster of eyes. In combat, Ludwig shambles. He lunges, he charges relentlessly. The boss fight is a nightmare filled with screams. He is an unspeakable, horrifying beast. What was once the leader of the church hunters has become completely degraded, becoming the worst example of what he was supposed to eradicate. And then, the second phase happens. At his lowest point, Ludwig finds his guiding moonlight and reclaims a piece of his nobility. He grips the holy moonlight sword in both hands, and then combat begins again. Now, however, his posture has changed. He stands upright. His screeching has been replaced with the grunts of a human. He wields his weapon with skill and deliberate intent. It viscerally contrasts what this boss fight was like even moments before. Even his boss name changes from Ludwig the Accursed to Ludwig the Holy Blade. It's an absolutely exhilarating moment. The music in the second phase is some of the best in any Souls game, perfectly complementing Ludwig's new moveset. One of the reasons the music works so well is because the shift happens during the second phase transitional cutscene. The game seems to be trying to get the opening to play during Ludwig's monologue, and the crescendo right after the player gets control of the character. Which I have to admit, still gets me very excited, even though I've seen that cutscene at least a dozen times. This isn't something that From Software just does in boss fights either, they do it all the time. In Bloodborne you can be killed by a special enemy and get kidnapped. When you wake, you'll find yourself in a jail. There is no lantern around to transport you back to the hunter's dream. And dying in this area won't take you to a lantern, it will simply put you back in the jail. The area that you're in is large and ominous. Cryptic notes lie in the ground to enhance the feeling that you are somewhere that you should not be. And most disquieting of all is that you hear the sound of chanting. That's really the worst part, because Bloodborne generally has no music in the normal environment. In fact, Souls games generally have no music in the normal environments. Music is usually reserved for boss battles or hub areas, which makes this chanting particularly unnerving. What is it? What's it supposed to be? Was it cultists performing in a ritual? Were we in a giant boss room and just didn't know it yet? Were they calling out to the Great Ones, and was the second voice the Great One's answer? That moment was great. You were supposed to feel out of place and unnerved. You were supposed to be trembling in awe, trepidation, and curiosity. They nailed the atmosphere, and part of the reason it was so good was because it was supported by the gameplay. The area is trying to be oppressive and inhospitable, to feel like you really shouldn't be there. To reflect this, the enemies in the area are unusually hard. It's possible to end up in the Hypogean jail at a very early level, which means many people will lose most of their HP every hit. That's if they don't die outright. And you can't just leave, you have to explore. Dying returns you to the jail area, which means you're trapped in this place until you can navigate your way out. The situation creates an atmosphere, and that atmosphere is a story. My favorite example of what I'm trying to convey to you is the final boss of Dark Souls 3, the Soul of Cinder. You go in, and he seems to be just a regular knight enemy. But throughout the fight, you notice that he moves in a way that's reminiscent to how players move. As the battle drags on, he starts shifting form. He starts changing builds. He'll become a dex pyromancer with a curved sword, or he'll shift into a lance-wielding paladin, or a pure mage casting high-level spells. And sometimes he'll mix and match things. He'll shift to a pyromancer, use power within on himself, and then switch to the mage to take advantage of the damage buff while in a different form. Or he'll cast Homing Crystal Soul Mass on himself, then shift to the lance build to get into melee range while still putting pressure on you with the Homing Soul Masses. If you're fortunate, just from fighting this thing, you'll realize what it is. You'll realize what it's supposed to be. It's you. It's everybody. It's you in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 when you chose to link the fire. It's everyone that has ever chosen to link the fire. And when you finally beat him, you get his HP down to 0. He form shifts one more time. the music also changes in the background. Mixed into the song, you now hear... And with that sound, you know you face the first iteration of the fire linking cycle. Gwyn, the First Lord, with a moveset that brings to mind his original form. You realize that you're fighting a deific manifestation of all that came before. For me, this was a truly emotional moment. I got it the first time I went in there. I knew what I was facing, and it hit me in my heart. I get emotional just talking about it now. I think I lost a few times just from how much it affected me. The point I'm making is that in these situations, information is being transmitted to the player. The bestial madness of Ludwig's first face and the quiet nobility of the second are both partially conveyed through Ludwig's body language. Just the way he moves conveys story-enhancing information. In fact, it's the main way that information is transmitted at all in these games. The story and the gameplay are interconnected. They enhance one another, and together create this one moment. Ludwig's second phase boss transition. Ask anybody what their favorite moment or boss is in Bloodborne, and a huge number will tell you that this is the one I just described. I agree with the initial statement that critic said. Everything that's used to elaborate on the story is a narrative. And Souls games elaborate on their narrative with moments, impactful moments, and those moments are reinforced through gameplay, atmosphere, and themes. Now, of course, Souls games aren't the only ones that try to do this. Ideally, every game wants their disparate elements to synergize with one another. But Souls games, I think, are uniquely successful at it. People become obsessed with Souls lore in a way they simply don't for other games. I think that's because other games have options when it comes to delivering their narrative or setting the right tone. They can make heavy use of cutscenes or character dialogue. But Souls games don't have very many cutscenes or character dialogue. They do have item descriptions. But while item descriptions are a good way to deliver lore, the critic is right. They're not a good way to transmit story elements that are supposed to elicit an emotional response. As a result, Dark Souls and Elden Ring smuggle in their stories through the only other avenues they have available, namely the gameplay and environmental storytelling. And those, like I've tried to explain so far, do a great job, a fantastic job, of transmitting these moments, of eliciting in the players a specific experience. And by my estimation, these moments, this information transmitted, they are stories. They are narrative. But are they plot? Well, I don't know. It depends on what you consider a plot. I feel like much of this argument really is semantics. It's people wanting to categorize things in a certain way and keep things separate and in different boxes. But personally, at the very least, I feel Elden Ring deserves its nomination. Storytelling like this, that is complex and fragmented, has never gotten the recognition I feel it deserves. I think it's a good thing that Elden Ring has been nominated despite the weirdness of how it structures its narrative, because that means that the broader population, the broader industry, is beginning to recognize that this is a legitimate way to tell a story, a valuable way to tell a story that's just as valid as any other. And that is the end of this video. Please unsubscribe and unclick the bell notification. If you're a Horizon or God of War fan, please leave some aggressive comments in the comment section. If you want some advice as to what those comments should be, I would recommend insulting the intelligence of Souls players. Tell them that they're just pretending to understand the story to feel superior to others. And as for the Elden Ring fans, I would recommend retaliating by saying that the storytelling in God of War and Horizon is formulaic and old-fashioned. Please create an environment so toxic that Miyazaki wants to put it in his next game. And if I haven't alienated you or inspired you to do any of that, then I'm sure I'll get to you in a future video. As always, thank you very much for watching.